Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Our next guests are the folks behind the incredible new film, Leave No Trace. It's a movie that tracks in subtlety and small moments, but says so much about the big feelings so many of us have about the world, and I think especially right now. Let's take a look.
It's not a drill.
Yeah, it's right up here.
He's got him.
Stand up.
You alone out here? My daughter's with me.
Dad?
Let's go.
Can you tell me where you live? In the park?
There's 435 questions. Respond true or false to each question.
Who taught you how to read?
My dad teaches me.
You're actually quite a bit ahead of where you need to be.
I wake up rested and peaceful most mornings.
True.
My day-to-day life is full of things that keep me interested.
True.
I have nightmares or troubling dreams.
Was your dad in the service?
He was.
Do you feel safe living with your dad?
We didn't need to be rescued.
Your dad needs to provide you shelter and a place to live.
He did.
It's not a crime to be unhoused, but it's illegal to live on public land.
We have found an option.
Are we gonna be okay here?
We can still think our own thoughts.
Keep pedaling. Look where you want to go.
School is about social skills, not just intellectual ones.
I think it might be easier on us if we try to adapt.
We're wearing their clothes, we're in their house, we're eating their food, we're doing their work. We have adapted.
First of 1,000, right on the wall.
Pack your things.
Did you even try? 'Cause I can't tell.
Somebody said it's unspeakable love to me.
Where's your home?
With my dad.
Lift that burden off of me.
I don't want to leave. Same thing that's wrong with you isn't wrong with me.
Lift that burden off of me.
Where are you guys headed?
I don't think we knew where we were going.
It remains to me.
Oh, that trailer makes me want to cry. Everybody, please give a round of applause for Anne Rosellini, Linda Reisman, Anne Harrison, and the great Debra Granik. I love this film. I really love it. What made you want to tell another story about people struggling?
I think the novel, when we had a chance to read it and really visualize it, filled us with a sense of wonder about why had this family chosen to live undetected, and what is it that they were leaving behind, and why, and what would happen if they could no longer live this way? You know, what would happen if they were detected? And I am interested when people are seeking something outside of the sort of conditioning in which they're born into, or what we would call, in some ways, the pressure of social conformity. How do they fare? You know, how do we deal with people that are non-conforming? And I'm also very interested in what it takes, the resources people utilize when the path isn't laid out and it's not simple and there's no cushion for people. What are they using to actually do this navigation and getting to where they need to go?
How much of your job as working with the book and then writing the movie and then directing it is figuring out what to leave in and what to take away? And I know anyone could be like, oh, that's the job of any writer, that's the job of any director, but there is something very specific about the nature of the writing of this movie and the dialogue between the characters, because oftentimes it's sparse and poetic, where in other movies it would be very direct and simple about the nature of what they have to do, but then sometimes the movie is that as well, because that's how we have to move forward with the plot. Right. I think specifically about some of the lines, like, we can think our own thoughts here. It's not necessarily explained. It kind of is when you learn who he is and maybe why, but most movies wouldn't really traffic in it that way. Can you talk about that? Very long-winded question.
No, that's okay. I mean, I would say that's a very, very much the coming out of Peter's book, out of My Abandonment, Peter Rock's novel. the father spoke in a very specific way. It was terse. It reminds me of, almost like it was Bergman with this notion that nothing would be said that didn't, that could be said succinctly or could be said without words. And the daughter kind of had become very accustomed to that and could read him in other ways and knew when he was experiencing fear or discomfort. He didn't verbalize that. She could hear it. She could hear when sort of that night terror experience would strike him. And then she uses maybe more language than he does. She tries to divert his attention and distract him. But these were inspirations from the way that Peter had constructed this person to be very internal. And sometimes he almost spoke in puzzles, or like you say, these very kind of pelletized, specific thoughts he had or values that he was trying to express to her.
You get it. You know what he's saying. You know what he means. But at the same time, another movie would be far more literal. It would force a literalization of the way that he talks, I think. And I think there's also an assumption about people on the margins being very literal rather than poetic, which I think you've always fought very much against, especially with this and with Winter's Bone. I am going to go to everybody else. I am sorry, but why has it been so long since we've gotten a feature from you, a narrative fiction feature from you? What have you been doing outside of this documentary that you made?
Well, and another documentary, no. I mean,
I've been busy.
Oh no, yeah. Well, with narratives, they take a while to get off for various reasons. Some of them very meaningful, good reasons, right? Which is writing a lot of versions of the script until you feel that it's really reflecting both all that was stellar in the novel, and then some of the wonderful things you found when you scouted and researched the real location, some of the real people who inform the script. After you feel like you've toiled on one version, some people will actually add, unexpectedly. So then scouting, getting the ducks in order, that I would say that, as strange as it may seem to people, that each phase of putting together a narrative has this pretty hefty time frame. Not because you want it to go slow. Even what they call going out to an actor, right? Going out to an actor requires that then the actor read the script, and they sometimes can take a very long time to understand what their schedule. People are helping them try to figure out when they can fit different things in. Getting that response can be weeks, months, sometimes. Getting a response from financiers who read it. All of these things happen. We got very lucky with some parts being more accelerated than we could have anticipated, and it was very healthy for this project.
How long had the four of you been working on this project before you got into pre-production? Even though I know sometimes pre-production can fall apart and then you have to do it again and go it again. So how long? When did it really begin? The four of you together as a team.
It was 2012. I think Debra read the script and agreed. The book and agreed to direct. And so it was a 3.5, 4 year writing process actually between Anne and Debra, who just worked it through again and again and made an incredibly beautiful script, which is not necessarily the script that we shot, but it was the first stage. It was the beginning of Debra's process was to have that script and then do more research and everything. But yeah.
How much has the film gone off from the script, and was that always the intention that you get like a bit of a blueprint and then sort of improvise after that? Improvise is an overused word. I don't necessarily mean improvisation on set.
No, and maybe a good reinterpretation of improvisation, because that makes it sound like you're starting from nothing, right? And I know where you're going with this. Which I think I do, which is that another way to translate would be say room for changes and variations within how the scenes are filmed, that the actor may feel that they're going to add something, either because the circumstance arose, where Tom is eating an egg and she really wants more salt on it, so even though it was not scripted to ask her father one more time to pass the salt, that's coming out of the fact that she's really, attempting to eat this egg and not have it be a torture, and she requires more salt, so it's going to happen. And that was a take I decided to use, That sounds so trivial and mundane, but all I'm trying to say is that she was responding to real circumstances, and she was in the scene. Other instances were when they were doing things with their tools. You can't really script that she strikes down on her stick as she's carving it 3 times. She's going to do what she does. Ben's going to glance over. if he feels moved to compliment her because he thinks she's doing like a pretty outstanding job, he will do that. And that there's space in that kind of scene for them to really watch each other, really listen, really respond.
So you want to set up a you want to set up a world where you can film these things that may turn into scenes or may just be sort of brief moments between the characters. How often do you find that within doing that you're like, oh no, we got to change this thing next week because we found this moment now that'll change what we were planning for next week?
That would wreak havoc. That would, I mean, that would be. I'm trying to think of filmmakers, you know, in the international filmmaking world for whom that, I mean, I think Fassbinder did that back in the day, you know.
Well, he was making like 30 films in a day. Like
Yeah, yes, and, you know.
also on a lot of drugs.
Yeah, no, I know, and that's, but I guess what I just say is that there was some way in which he could change on a dime and then recover or remold, really, so there was something in his brain that could see a way a story could get redirected really quickly. And I would say that ours is more that a scene where they're confronting each other, the script was extremely, it was adhered to very, almost word for word, right? You know, or, because that's a scene that both actors really need to rely on having internalized a script and stick to it. Yeah. And so those changes that we're discussing happen when there's real process being performed on screen, or for example, if the teens are convened for their rabbit club, you know, that the rabbit trainer, the 4-H trainer, who's a real 4-H trainer, he will pick the protocols. We can't know if a rabbit's going to slip down. You know, girl's trying really hard to hold her rabbit, and if it slips down, and of course that's a lyrical moment, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't say, you know, one of the teens has trouble holding her rabbit because it's squirming. You know, we didn't direct the rabbit to squirm or not squirm. I'm being a little silly, but I'm trying to say is that within sort of a documentary approach to that scene, much of what will happen is determined by following a real protocol and all the variations therein.
What was the script writing process like?
Well, I mean, I think there's sort of several layers to the process, which, you know, the first is sort of the version or versions that come from our offices in New York, and then, you know, we usually always try to go to a location and really do a lot of research, and that is always the next sort of like huge change in the script, which is what did we actually find, what did we actually see? If we saw a 4-H club performing a medical check on some animals, and we know that this is cinematic and beautiful, of course we're going to find a place for it in the script. So then the next level is obviously once we're on the ground and in pre-production and actually casting and working with people and all of the ways that they contribute to that script. So it's a long and organic process. I don't think there's ever a document that we say, oh, this is it, this is it. It's always with the idea that, you know, reality and sense of place, locations, cast will imbue what they bring, you know, to the story.
Going off of something that we just said about Fassbinder, just because it's in my head, it's very tangential, excuse me, but the idea that someone could make 40 or 50 films, however many he made in like 13 years, and could churn out 2 or 3 a year is not just impossible in terms of workload now, but in terms of what can get financed and what a filmmaker has the power to do. And I wonder if that puts an even greater pressure on the project that you're doing when it's every few years that you're doing a project. Whereas, you know, we look back on some of his movies, and some of his movies, like Why Does Hair R Run Amok, is not the best movie in the world or the best of his filmography, but it's still kind of interesting, and we let a lot slide because he was making so many things at once, and it seems like filmmakers and producers are given very rare opportunity to sort of experiment and let anything slide, and it has to be kind of perfect out of the gate.
Yeah, I just want to address that quickly. I think a lot of it is the state of distribution. And, you know, making a film and understanding who your audience is, and is it a film for theatrical, is it a film for an online, you know, streaming service? So we were very fortunate to have Bleecker Street pick up our film for theatrical, which is where it belongs. So I think that's part of it.
Yeah, the landscapes are beautiful. You have to see this movie
In movie theater.
Yeah, in a movie theater. It's not lost on me that on stage we have 4 women talking about this movie, and yes, it very much is about a young girl discovering herself in relationship to her father, but it is also in many ways about, in my opinion, a kind of toxic masculinity, a man who feels isolated and wants to be isolated and can't communicate with the world. He's broken with reason, but there's also a sense of his sort of maleness can't allow him to get past something. Was that something that you guys talked about at all while writing it? Do you feel like your perspectives as women affected that and how you wrote it and talked about it?
Ooh, that's a layered question because it it really deals with so much of such a long kind of, I would say, backstory of human history. About how I guess maybe the emotional skill sets that men and women are socialized to have really been very tunneled down over time, I think. And I think that I think what maybe one sensibility that we came to it with is Tom's desire to know how, to try to understand him. And it's not a choice. I think it becomes part of her life to sort of to be also caring of him, and I think we were also interested in when do you have to acknowledge that you're differentiating from someone, and it's interesting. It's hard for me to use the word today. In a different circumstance, I might be able to use the word toxic masculinity, because when I think about a person who's grappling with PTSD, it's not just their masculinity that's at play. It's something that happened to their whole sort of nervous system and their whole, it's not just their testosterone or something. It's something that's happened to their whole being.
Right. I'll correct myself a little bit, just because I don't want to give the impression that he's like, tweeting hateful remarks at women online or something like that. No, he's a person who is unable to express himself. Yes, because of PTSD, and I think also because of a certain, as you said, the way that masculinity has been drilled into men for so long, and the way that a man is supposed to be.
And so that maybe in some ways, without trying to be too judgment laden on this, it's an opportunity to see how Tom and her father will, given that, what language they have left, what signs and symbols, what way of negotiating. I think one thing I appreciated about the character was that he definitely he's convicted. He has convictions. He's sort of strict about how he wants to do things. But I think we operated with the underlying premise that he did not want to oppress her. That. Yes. But when it did happen, it was a side effect of him being, if you want to call it, almost dogmatic, right? And also hypervigilant. So there are things at play that would compromise his ability to be more of a negotiator, more of a, I want to say, sometimes his own things would block out his ability to listen to her and really understand her.
I think that said, it's no coincidence that he has a daughter and not a son in terms of the story and the way that it unfolds and the way that she becomes much more community-oriented and much more engaged with building bridges with other people. In some way, and this is crazy and maybe very silly, I saw a few days after I saw the movie, because it was just in my head for days, I ended up seeing it as a kind of odd metaphor for where we are as a country right now in terms of like trying to build bridges with others, and then a very isolationist pocket of the community built off of a kind of drilled down maleness, sort of slinking off into the woods and hiding from the rest of the world. I don't think that's what your intention was at all, but somehow you left that with me.
I think that's astute. I think that's very precise and very much in relation to what you're feeling about the times in which we're now attempting to function, So I mean, I'm just saying, what you just said doesn't sound somehow in any way off base to me. I feel like we've had those emotions ourselves, and I think one of the things that the research was a catalyst for was that turned out many people, when we inquired in locations, in a truck stop, or in social services, other places, generally people would like to help when they can. And so we're living in a time that kind of perpetrates a feeling that that's not true, that the only thing we get off on is utter snark, exchanged in this system we call social media, and so, but traveling and asking, okay, in a truck stop, what would you do if you were approached? The answers were, I'd try to use my skill set to figure out if this is something that's in some way harmful for her, and if not, even though it's not legal to pick up people at truck stops, I would most likely, seeing their dire situation, most likely I would probably take that risk. Right. So that so other truckers couldn't do that. It's not everybody. But so it becomes having to go actually research what's different on the ground from what we see in the ones and zeros.
How are people more human than we suspect or expect them to be on a daily basis?
Yes.
Via the stereotypes that are constantly perpetrated about them. You're a master, I think, of tension, and I think Winter's Bone is a very clear kind of noirish tension that comes with a mystery thriller that's happening in that world. And the tension for this is just simply what's going to happen, which is really hard to maintain, but you do incredibly well in this film. Were you ever worried about that as the sort of main narrative crux of the film? Whereas in Winter's Bone, you have a missing body, you have these people who are sort of like coming down the path to possibly kill her or do these different things. In this, it is literally just what's going to happen to them.
I think we were very anxious about that, right? I mean, that is because the expectations for kind of, I would say, high stakes threat of violence or high stakes.
But there is a high stakes threat of violence in the movie.
Right,
That's the thing.
And there's also existential high stakes.
Yes.
If you do not have a place to be, if you are told there is no place for you, you cannot be here, you cannot be there. Where do you go? If there's no safety net for you. So that is existential stake. Absolutely. If you are in a kinship system, if your father feels that there's no place that he could live in any normative way or mainstream way, what do you do? That is high stakes. Do you go or do you stay? Do you follow? Do you cleave? Those are you're absolutely right. I agree. I mean, I love you for saying this, but I will say, in a time when the expectation to be jolted by something higher than existential, right? Like the threat of physical violence is sort of how we drive most of our narratives these days that are not comedies,
I could imagine pitching this to financiers or pitching this to actors or someone and having them say something like, well, who's chasing them? Why? Why are they on the run? What, can we get somebody? Maybe there's some gangsters or something and they're on the road looking at them. But this film is about the danger of what's going to happen to them, and also the fact that she is a little girl in a consistently precarious situation. And that on its own, I think, for filmmakers is a tightrope to walk, because you have to remind an audience without at the same time have her hanging from a cliff every other act.
You know what's interesting when we screen this for movies is that the fact that everybody that they encounter is actually kind and wants to help. And people are so conditioned to expect that they're going to do something horrible and something awful is just right over the horizon. So it creates its own kind of tension, actually, in a world where people are just trying to do something good for these people, but they have to find their own way.
What a wonderful tension to create for an audience. Oh, are people bad? Oh, no, they're good. Oh, are people bad? Oh, no, they're good. Let's get some questions from our audience.
Hey, everyone. So the movie looks great. I can't wait to see it. And so a lot of your movies seem to deal with like grit outside the elements, things like that. I was wondering what kind of attracts you to telling these kinds of stories, and what might be your personal connection to nature and that kind of stuff.
Good question.
Yes. Well, I think as a person who lives in a huge metropolis, as we do, right? I'm always wondering about life outside the city, because this is now the life I know. And so, but really the novels have brought me to regions, right? I don't just have a checklist say I think, why don't we go down to southern Missouri and try to find a story, and as much as I would like to think that was on my wish list regarding the Pacific Northwest, it was the novel. It was the novel that said, come hither. This story is set here very specifically, very importantly. Her connection to the forest, or both their connection to the forest, was not something, we weren't going to change that to be the Great Plains. or Louisiana. It could be a different version, whatever. But I think you know what I'm trying to say. That the novels have this rich specificity. Go there, go there to that exact coordinate. I will attempt before it's all over. I will attempt to tell a story in an urban setting, and the documentary that we're working on is set here in many of the boroughs. But what I want to say is that it's harder to shoot in the city. The forest was a relatively, I want to say, it was a conducive filming environment. Being in a holler in southern Missouri in the Ozarks was a conducive environment. It operates much like a set in the sense that you're sequestered. You can organize yourself. Your crew can get its bearings and function much like a set, and it just eliminates a lot of who has not seen the long blocks quadrant off for the trucks and for all that sort of physical navigation that it takes to operate in a big city. And so I would say for lower budget films, feasibility plays out also. These novels sign to me and to us that this is doable without the keys to the kingdom,
Without having to change your film so much or your story so much so that you could acquire more and more and more to be able to shoot it. I'm curious, this isn't an observation that I made in the wake of this film coming out, but First Reformed, I think this film, and You Were Never Really Here, the Joaquin Phoenix film from a couple months ago, all three really great films, all three different so much in their own respects, but all three really tracking in depression, PTSD, how we live right now, how the elements of how our world can be kind of soul-crushing at times. I'm wondering if you all feel a certain kind of kinship with these movies just in terms of them coming out right now and exploring these themes.
Oh, when you put it that way, boy. No, I just mean just the heaviness of what you've enumerated, and yet I do think
Three of my favorite films of the year,
yes,
by the way. I'm not
yeah,
gonna,
No, I just meant the sort of the conditions in which we might find ourselves. Someone put beautiful words to it, like that. Someone, I guess it was a journalist who said, "How are you doing?" on the phone, and I said, I think it was literally the day after the G7 thing had happened. The G7 debacle had, yeah. And
fuck up.
Yeah, yeah, yes. And I was feeling so hinky. I felt it didn't matter. I'll never say it didn't matter. I'm just saying I couldn't feel any. There was just no part of me that could feel the joy and pleasure of having work received well. And it's just, and then she said to me, "Oh, you could use this phrase that you're okay in the personal and you're distressed or worried or upset in the communal." Meaning like that, yeah. So so you're supposed to be happy right now. This is a time when, we're trying to put forward work, and we actually put a lot into it, of course, and want to see it have a life, and yet certain news items just deplete you or crush you because you can't figure out how are we going to.
The end game here. What's sustainability? Yeah.
Yes.
I would argue that this movie will. I hope that it will fall in the middle of what you just described and make people see things a different way. I think that's possible.
Well, I think it sees hope in the communal.
Yes.
At one point, and as I was saying before, building the bridges. Yeah. Let's get another. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi guys, yeah, this film looks so beautiful. I can't wait to see it. So kind of going off of what you mentioned before about how maybe creators can see what's going on in the world and be like, why is this even important? We should be worried about different things. Do you think that's going to reflect more so in people's filmmaking, writing, music, anything like that? And have you seen ways that it already has?
Ooh, these are such good questions.
Well, I'm thinking First Reformed, which we were chatting about, is an example of a film that audiences have really responded to. It's a very strong movie, and it has a number of elements of current topical issues, aside from Paul Schrader's personal aesthetics. Right? Yeah. So I think the good news in the films that you've mentioned too is that audiences are embracing them and they're going to see them, and that's what we need.
It's shocking, given his deep dive into his own personal aesthetic tastes, that audiences have embraced it the way that it was. I mean, I could see the thematic material and the story, but like the fact that he made a clear Bresson homage in 2018 America, and audiences were like, "Hey, I'm down."
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It was
No, it's
shocking.
wonderful.
Yeah.
And I was going to say that humor is one of the things, in answer to your question, that humor, I think, is one way in which we're seeing some desire to be able to talk about things so that, one of the risks with the thing you mentioned, can films bring up the issues of the day, right? And the big fear is being dogmatic, right? Or having, all of a sudden it's not entertainment, right? When it, and humor is a very intriguing delivery system for being able to take on things, but in a way that, it's not that it's pre-digested, I just mean in a way that we experience it, that uses a lot of parts of our brains, not just feeling like, oh, that's dreary or that's heavy. And I was thinking a film that did that for me was Aki Kaurismäki's The Other Side of Hope. And, looking at the way in which everyday working class Finns were confronted with a situation in which they needed to interact profoundly with a newly arrived immigrant, and I guess illegal maybe in there. I'm blur on that, but and just that it brought them into a relationship that they hadn't ever expected, and it let the oddities of their idiosyncratic ways be seen by an outsider and vice versa. And I don't know, I just appreciate that humor was the way that you could almost just enjoy something from today's world that is problematic.
He's so good at that.
Yeah.
He's so good at the deadpan humor of different cultures sort of coming together and talking to people who don't relate, sort of coming. Him and Jarmusch really kind of do that together.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say Daddy's Home too, and I was going to agree with you.
Oh.
No, I'm kidding. I love this film so much. Everybody go see it in the theater, and when you see it, go back and watch the interview. You'll understand why I teared up. It's so beautiful, and it's got such an incredible, powerful ending, the whole movie. When is it getting released? When can people see the film? This Friday?
Yes.
Go see it
29th,
and see it in the theater.
And then rolling out in the rest of the country,
So then if you don't live in New York or LA.
Or San Francisco,
Or
or,
San
Boston, or Portland, or Seattle, or Phoenix.
That's where it's first coming out this
On
Friday.
Friday, yep.
Okay. I don't care about if you don't live outside of those places. I don't care. No, I'm kidding. Go find a way to see the movie.
Then
see
the
movie.
next week.
It's really wonderful, and give them a big round of applause for the great work. Thank you.